Masechet Yevamot Daf Ayin Het. We are first going to start today with analyzing the pasuk regarding Egyptian converts and analyze each and every word to see what it teaches us. And then we're going to get three different versions of a statement by Rabbi Yochanan regarding do we follow patrilineal or matrilineal descent when it comes to converts of the first, second, third generation of Egyptians, or do we follow whoever is more blemished? And that will take us up to the next Mishnah on Amud Bet. So we were talking about the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who makes that kal vachomer in the Mishnah, and he says regarding Egyptians, their women are permitted immediately. An Egyptian woman who converts is permitted immediately, like an Ammoni and Ammoni velo Ammonit. However, the sons are for 3 generations, and the Yehuda disagreed and said no, males and females are only permitted after 2 generations. Only the 3rd generation is permitted. Applies to both. Applies to females also. Okay, so now we have a derasha tenura banan. We start here. Tanya, Amar lehen Rabbi Shimon halacha ani omer. In the Mishnah, they asked him, "Do you have a kal vachomer? But we can refute that kal vachomer. Is it only kal vachomer, or do you have a tradition?" He says, "I have a tradition." And now, in addition, in this braita, ve'od mikra mesaya'ani, I can also derive it not only from a logical kal vachomer, but also from a word that helps me out. It says banim velo banot. The full 2 pisukim are lo ta'vadomi ki achichahu lo misri ki ger hayitabraso. That's just don't hate them. Next pasuk says banim asher yivadu lahem dor shilishi yavo lahem bikal Hashem. So it's mitzvat aseh that yes, you can marry them at 3 generations or later. Now notice it says banim. Specifically, we could just say, I don't know, mitzri, anyone, sherivadu lahem. So it says banim with masculine and not feminine. So that means that only the males are prohibited. Female converts are permitted even at the 1st generation. That's Rabbi Shimon. Good. Tenora banan, banim velo banot dibre Rabbi Shimon. Another braita says the same thing. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, hareu omer banim asher yivaldu lehem dor shilishi hakatuv telaan beleda. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says, no, you don't focus on the word banim, focus on the word yivaledu, that they will be born. And so all boys and girls are both born. So anyone who is born, is no good until the 3rd generation. Good. So that's Rabbi Yehuda, and that's how he reads the pasuk a bit differently from Rabbi Shimon and comes to an opposite conclusion. Now, reflecting on this baraita, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ilav da Amar Rabbi Yehuda hakatub telan beleda lo masai yadav veraglav bebet hamidrash. He makes an interesting point that it's a good thing that Rabbi Yehuda made this derasha and said it depends on on being born, and boys and girls are both born. And therefore, both are prohibited, because if he didn't say that, and he said only boys are prohibited, girls are permitted, like Rabbi Shimon, he would have had a big problem, wouldn't be able to stand in the Bet Midrash, because we would have caught him in a self-contradiction. What's the contradiction? Here's something else he said. Kevan damar mor. Rabbi Yehuda himself said in a similar, in another context, Kahal gerim ikri kahal, misri sheni b'mayitar, regarding what is considered a kahal. You have different people like a mamzer who cannot marry pesua daka, cannot marry into kahal. Who is kahal? Does that include converts or not? So most people say that converts are not included in kahal. Kahal means Jewish born and not converts, and therefore mamzer pesua daka cannot marry. Can marry a convert because they are not kahal. So this is in a way kind of lowering the status of a convert. They're not really part of the congregation. On the other hand, it does allow more marriages to happen between these different groups. But Rabbi Yehuda is the one that disagrees, and he says gerim are called kahal. Once they convert, they're fully Jewish, part of the regular congregation, which is a nice status for them. But it also means that they cannot marry mamzer, pesua daka, and other similar people. Okay, so if you combine these two things, That is, if Rabbi Yehuda had agreed with Rabbi Shimon that a female Egyptian convert is permitted even in that first generation, then they are considered kahal already in that first generation, because that's it, permitted right away. And now, as a member of kahal, that first generation Egyptian convert would not be able to marry a first or second generation Egyptian male convert, because they are prohibited lavo bakahal for 2 generations. So therefore, misri sheni b'mayitad, how can a male Egyptian convert in the second generation, who can they marry? They can't marry a Jew because they can't marry kahal. They can't marry an Egyptian woman, because Egyptian women are totally permitted, are part of kahal from the first generation. So there's no one that they could marry, and they'll never be able to produce a third generation. Rishonim note that maybe they could marry a mamzeret after 10 generations, or there are some other ways, but not really a simple way. So the Gemara says, well, I know, Dilma de'i abad v'nasib. Oh, maybe you're right. There's no permitted way for an Egyptian to produce a third generation, but maybe if he violated and the second generation male convert married a regular Jewish woman or a convert Jewish woman, it doesn't matter, those are prohibited. But if they do, then the next child that they have after that, the next generation will be permitted. And maybe that's what the Torah is saying. But that is not comfortable. De'i lo katav kera. The Torah would not give you a loophole that you have to do a prohibited action in order to get a positive result. It's not going to tell you a situation that you have to violate a law in order, and then then it's okay. All right, Torah is not going to give you scenarios where you have to violate the law to get there. All right, now we're going to bring a couple of possible counterexamples. Harem mamzer. Wait a second, there are some times when the Torah does talk about a case where there is a violation. For example, how is a mamzer produced? A violation. A man and a woman committed adultery, and she had a child with adultery. That child is a mamzer, and yet the Torah talks about that case. So sometimes the Torah talks about a case of if someone does something prohibited. No, that's different. Over there, it wants to tell you that if someone violates, then there's a negative consequence and the child will be prohibited. You need to know the prohibition. But it's not going to tell you what a permission, an allowance that happens because of a prohibition. Right? It's not, I'm going to encourage bad behavior here. Well, discourage bad behavior. So that's why, it makes sense to have to tell you mamzer. But it wouldn't tell you that, if you violate this b'diavad, then the third generation, and that's the only way to get a third generation permitted Egyptian. I mean, so what kind of law is that? That you can only permit the future generations if you violate? No, Torah's not going to have an example like that. Wait a second, we do have an example, another one. Hare mahazir gerushato ti'il regarding someone who returns his divorcee. They're married, and then they go and marry someone else, and then she marries someone else, divorces the second guy, and comes back to her first husband. They're not allowed they're not allowed to get married. If they do, the marriage is valid, and if they have a child, that child is not considered a mamzer. It's only a result of a lav. According to most opinions, not considered a mamzer. And we learned it from the fact that it says to'eva he, meaning she is a to'eva, but the child is not a to'eva. And so there it's telling you, look, see, even if you violate this law, then don't worry, the child will be okay. The Torah is giving you a case of if you do something bad, nevertheless something good, a valid outcome comes about. So this is against the principle you said that the Torah does not give the cases of hetera. No, no, there the Torah had to give you the basic prohibition. So it tells you this is a to'eva. She is not allowed to do this. And now from the word this, we make a derivation. I mean, it's not explicit in the Torah. This is just a dirasha that we made. Interesting. I mean, it does seem like in the Hava Amina, we're considering that dirasha like, oh, look, it's really in the Torah, right? It's a good question of the dirashot in the rabbis' own minds. Was this like really what the pasuk means, or they're just adding a kind of mnemonic to it in the question answer? At least it seems like they think that, no, the Torah's really in there. Okay, but anyway, in the answer, the point is that, no, it has to present the problem and say, she is a problem. Okay, we can infer, incidentally, that this child from that union will be okay, but it still needs to say that for the mother. Okay, so we took care of that tangent. All right, now that we brought up this pasuk regarding the Egyptian converts, let's look at each and every word and see what it teaches us. Tenu Rabbanan, im ne'emar banim, lama ne'emar dorot. V'im ne'emar dorot, lama ne'emar banim. Here's the pasuk again. It says, banim, children, asher yivaldu dor shilishi. So first it says banim. So I know that's talking about sons, right? We discuss, is it sons or sons and daughters? Okay, either way, that's generations. But then it goes ahead and says, Yivaledu lahem dor, another generation. So it seems redundant. Why do you have to say sons and also say the word dor, generations? Okay, so Baraita says, if you said banim, why need dorot? If you said dorot, why need banim? Inemar banim velo nemar dorot hiti omer. Ben rishon v'sheni asur. Shilishim mutar. Lechach nemar dorot. If it only says banim asher yivaldu lahem, shilishi yavo lahem. Bikal Hashem. I would have thought it means that you have this couple, man and woman, who are Egyptian and they converted and they marry. Good. Their first son, no good. Second son, invalid. The third son, they can marry. That's what it seems, right? Banim, the banim are no good, except for the third one. So you have to say dor, so it's clear that, no, we're talking about generations, not just in a family, brothers. Good. And if it only says the third generation, and it didn't say the children of banim, then I would have thought, what do you mean generation? Starting from when? Maybe starting from Har Sinai. Starting from now, Har Sinai, you're not allowed to marry the next two generations of Egyptians. The third one, you can. I mean, this would make some logical sense. It's the Egyptians of that generation who were really evil and came and tried to destroy Bnei Israel. After a couple of generations, now it's new people. Like, there were, nobody worse than the Nazis. Nobody would want to buy German cars 2 generations ago. By now, we say, oh, it's their grandchildren. They're not. They've changed their ways. They've changed their education, and they don't hate Jews anymore. So many more people will buy German cars now than they would have, for example. So there's some logical sense to say that after 3 generations, any Egyptians are considered the same as everyone else. So that's why it has to say banim. No, it has to do from the time. It has to do with when they're born. Whenever they convert, then you have to wait 2 generations after that convert converts their sons and children, and then grandchildren. Then it's permitted. That's when we start counting, not from Har Sinai. All right, good. We resolved that. Now, lahem mehem meneh. Lahem halach achar pesulan. Back to the pasuk. Notice it says banim asher yadu lahem toshiyavo lahem. It says the word lahem twice. Why does it do that? Number one, the first lahem says that you should count from them, meaning the generation that converts is considered 1, and then and a second generation is also not allowed. By the third, the grandchild of the convert is already permitted, as opposed to, don't think that you counted that the convert is 0 and their child is 1, and then you need 3 after the convert. No, lahem, they're counted as 1. And the second lahem teaches that we should follow the disqualification. In other words, if you have a male Egyptian convert marries a Jewish woman, or a female Egyptian convert marries a Jewish man, so which one do we follow, the man or the woman? Halakha says you follow whichever one is disqualified. So whoever the convert is, the child will follow the one who is the Egyptian convert, and not the fully Jewish, born Jewish parent. Okay, that's the second lahem. Has to be that both of them are kosher. If any one is not valid, the child is also unfit to marry into the kahal. Now, v'yisterich lemichtav lahem, v'yisterich lemichtav asher yivaledu. Okay, furthermore, why do you need the words lahem? And also, notice, banim asher yivaledu. You could have skipped lahem, dor shilishi, right? Or banim lahem, dor shilishi. What do you mean? That will be born. And also, to them, דאי כתב לחמנה אשר יוולדו, הווה אמינא מביניהם מנה, כתב לחמנה להם. This is teaching us the same thing that we just saw, that because if it said asher yivaledu, that will give birth to, I would have thought that you need 3 generations after the convert, right? The convert then says only their great-grandchildren are okay. That's why it says lahem, that we do count the first generation. We already used this word to teach the very same thing. But now we're relating it not to the other lahem, but rather to the asher yivaledu. So again, that's why we need lahem. But the better question now is, v'katav rachamana lahem, so just put lahem. Hava amina, why do I need asher yivaledu? Having misit me'oberet shenit kayeda hi ubena had. Katav rachamana asher yivaledu. If I said lahem, I would have thought that, let's say, an Egyptian who is pregnant, she converts while pregnant. I might have thought that since this person who is pregnant, she and her fetus converted together, that's only counted as 1 generation. And then there would be this baby who's now will be born after the conversion is counted as 1. And you need 2 more generations after the baby, which was the great-grandchild of the mother. So I might have thought that. So that's why it says asher yivaledu, that are born, and it doesn't matter as long as they're born after the conversion, even though they were already conceived before the conversion. We go by the time of birth, and therefore that baby, the child that's born, is considered now already a 2nd generation, and their child would be permitted. That's why it says asher yivaledu, go by the birth. Okay, now we're bringing in the pasuk regarding mamzer. It says lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem, gam dor asiri lo yavo lo b'kal Hashem. This word is extra, lo yavo b'kal Hashem. What do you mean lo? That he cannot come. Why do I need lahem here and lo regarding mamzer? So the law is coming to teach this very same rule, the one that we mentioned before from the second word lahem, that we follow whoever is the pasul one. Doesn't matter who the father or mother is. Whether the father is pasul, then the child is pasul. If the mother is pasul, the child also is pasul. It's not matrilineal or patrilineal. When it comes to both of these issues, regarding Egyptian convert from the first 2 generations, whatever that is, we follow the more pasul one. If it's, let's say, an Egyptian convert from the first generation or second with a Jew, all right, then you're always going to follow the child is, let's say, from the first generation, then is no good because now they're only 2nd generation. We don't follow the Jewish-born parent, but rather the Egyptian convert parent. So too for mamzer. Doesn't matter if you have either the mother or the father is a mamzer, the child is a mamzer. So we know that from the word law. Now the question is, why do we need to teach us that in both cases? Can I derive one for the other? No, because if it only said it regarding mamzer, regarding Egyptian, because it comes from an unfit seed. The Egyptian is no good. Even if they convert first, 2nd generation, they themselves are unfit. So since it comes from unfit seed, it makes sense that we'll follow the child that's born will follow whoever is unfit, father or mother. But mamzer, both their parents independently are kosher, are fit to marry. The problem is that they weren't permitted to each other. So I might say that in that case, since the mother and the father are both fit, they're both kosher, so then we would follow only the father or only the mother, and not whoever is the mamzer. Or not whoever is the problem. So therefore, it has to teach us that regarding mamzer. And if you only told me the law regarding mamzer, that we follow whichever parent is not fit, is a mamzer themselves. That's because mamzer goes on forever. But in the case of the Egyptian, where it's permitted at 3 generations and on, so this is more lenient. And I might say, no, I don't follow anyone who's pasul. Maybe it'll be, I only always follow the father, or only always follow the mother. So therefore, I need to teach us this law in both cases. Okay, there we go. And that completes the analysis of this pasuk regarding the Egyptians. And now we get to a statement of Rabbi Yochanan, which is directly related to what we just spoke about. We just said that you follow whoever's more blemished. So let's see. First, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say patrilineal, and we begin here. Amar Rabba bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Misri Sheni Shenasa Misrit Rishona. A male Egyptian convert is second generation. His wife is a first generation Egyptian convert. So now, what is the status of the child? Bena Shelishi Havai. So the son goes after the father. The father was second generation. The son is third generation, and therefore already permitted, even though his mother was only a first generation convert. So here, so you don't go by the one that's more pasul. Rather, al makasavar batar dideh shadinaneh. Rather, we go after the father, not the mother. Good. That's Rabbi Yochanan's statement that was transmitted and then by Bar Hana. Now we're going to ask a couple of questions on it. Mativ Rav Yosef. Rabbi Tarfon omer yecholin mamzerini taher. Kesad. Bitafon says you can kosher a mamzer. This is very important, right? Because mamzer, otherwise, forever, all their children will be mamzerim. You know, what should they do? Maybe better not to have a child at all. Is there any way that a mamzer can have a kosher child? Yes. Mamzer nasa shivcha havalad aebed shichricho nimsa ben chorin. Here's what you do. A mamzer is allowed to marry a shivcha kenaanit. That's permitted. They're not kahal. So they get married. They have a child. Now the child's status is Eved, is also a slave. All you have to do is free that child, and he is full, free Jew, and not a mamzer. The father's mamzer status goes away. So now from this case, Alma batar dida shadinaneh, we see that we follow the mother's status as a shivcha, not the father. Isn't that a challenge to the Rabbi Yochanan who said patrilineal? No, shaneh tam tamar kerai shavi ladet ladoneha. Regarding a shivcha Kanaanit, it says specifically when an Eved Ivri marries a shivcha Kanaanit, then when he goes free after 6 years, the wife and the children stay with the master, meaning the children follow the wife. That's a special example that regarding maidservants, the children follow her. But that's exceptional. The pasuk goes out of its way to tell you that. But otherwise, could very well be that we follow patrilineal descent for unfitness. Okay, that's Rav Yosef's question. Next question, Mativ Rava. Amar Rabbi Yehuda min Yamin ger Misri hayali chaver mitamidei Rabbi Akiva. We already saw this story, but now we're bringing it in here as a basis of a question. That Rabbi Yehuda reports that there was this guy min Yamin who was an Egyptian convert and a friend, and also a fellow student of Rabbi Akiva. And he had a plan, this Binyamin, of how he's going to get his kids kosher. Famar ani misri rishon, I am first generation. Nasati misri rishona, I married another woman who is also first generation Egyptian convert, permitted. Asiya libni misrit sheniya kedeshi ben beni ra'ui lava bakahal. We'll have a son, and then my son will I'll marry them off to a woman who is herself second generation Egyptian convert. 2 and 2 will produce a third generation. That's the end of the Baraita. Now we have a question. If we always go by the father, then why do you need to find a wife who's herself is second generation? Even if this Binyamin's son marries a first generation convert, which is probably easier to find because you can just go take any Egyptian woman and convert them, and even that would still be fine because you go by the father. But the fact that he didn't say that must be that you go by the mother. Challenge to the Rabbi Yochanan. Yes, you're right. In fact, this Baraita, the text of it is itself problematic, and Rabbi Yochanan told the professional memorizer, no, change it to Rishona, that the wife of the son can even be a first generation and will still be permitted. So that is in fact what Rabbi Yochanan thought, and he thought that girsa is a wrong girsa. All right, good. That's all the first version of Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabba Bar Chana. But now we have a second version. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel and said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Mitzri sheni shenasa misrit rishona, a second generation Egyptian man who married a woman who is a first generation. Bena sheni havai. The child is only a second generation, prohibited. In other words, we go by the mother. The mother was first, the child is second. And we don't care about the father, because the father was second, the child would have been third. Alma batar imesha dinanes, we follow the mother. Okay, so now some discussion on this version. Amar le'Abaye, elaha de'amar Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to have a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan from a completely different case that doesn't seem to be related at all. We'll try to explain how it's related. Okay, here's the case. Hifrish hatat. So remember, Rabbi Yochanan here is following the mother. Now, hifrish hatat me'oberet v'yalda. The case is where someone has an animal, they want to make a hatat. And this animal that they made a hatat happened to be pregnant. And it gave birth. Now, before, in the meantime, after I designated it, it gave birth. So now I have the mother and the child both sitting there. Which one should I use for a chatat? Rasa mitkaber ba, rasa mitkaber bevalda. I can use either one, the mother or the child. I can pick one. Now, now how could it make sense? How could you possibly use either the mother or the child, even though the child wasn't born? Oh, it would all make sense according to the opinion that says that ubad, a fetus, is not simply a limb of its mother. In general, there's a big machloket about this, that some say a fetus is just a limb of its mother. So, for example, if you did shechita on the mother, you could eat the fetus without doing shechita, because it's just another limb. Like it has a liver, it has a heart, it has a leg. Here's just another part of it. You can treat it the same way as everything else. So if that's if it is ubar yerech imo, if it is part of it. If it's not part of the mother, that means it's a separate entity. That would mean if you did shechita on the mother, in a regular case, not a korban, then you have to see this fetus, you have to do shechita on the fetus also, because it's an own entity. So if you say that the ubad is its own entity, then Rabbi Yochanan's halacha here makes sense, because he said, I set aside this animal as a korban chatat. When he set it aside, he's setting aside really two animals, the mother and the fetus that's inside, which is its own entity. He set it aside also. And so, therefore, he has a choice. Because a person can, it's valid to set aside two animals as a chatat, lachrayut, just as a guarantee. You never know, maybe one's going to get lost, maybe one will become damaged. I want to have one and a backup one. And Rabbi Yoshaya says, if you have two animals right in front of you, two born live animals, so I bring both of them, one as just in case, so I can choose whichever one I want. And the second one, tid'eh, we leave it to graze until it gets a blemish, and then we redeem it. Fine. So you can do that, and then that would make sense. So this statement of Rabbi Yochanan that the limb that you can use either the mother or the daughter makes sense if you think that the fetus is its own entity. This is the problem. See, if the fetus is its own entity, then it's harder to say we follow the mother. That's how we're going to connect it. Okay. But if you say that the fetus is part of its mother, then this is a child of a chatat. In general, if you have a chatat offering, and then it gives birth afterwards, you cannot let it graze and then redeem it. You have to cause that cause it more directly to die, because you can't use it for anything. It's on the one hand holy, but you cannot make it as a sin offering, and therefore you can't use it for anything. So if you just consider it like a child that's born, and it's a part of the limb of it's part of a limb of its mother, then you would not be able to choose the child. The child would not be sacrificable. Okay, so the point of all this is that we're connecting. It's this tenuous connection, but nevertheless, the Gemara is making this connection. If you would say that it is the fetus is a limb of its mother, then it would make sense to have matrilineal descent, because it's part of its mother the whole time. But if it's separate, if the fetus is not a limb of its mother but a separate entity, then it does not make sense to say matrilineal descent. So this source here regarding the chatat is a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan, who said we follow matrilineal descent when regarding mitzrim. Okay, that's the question. Ishtik, Rav Dimi, who was the messenger, says, I don't know, it's a good question, I don't have an answer. Amale dilma shane hatam dichtiv. Abaye, who asked the question, said, I'll tell you an answer. Maybe it's different regarding the Egyptian converse. Dichtiv asher yivaledu hakatuv telao beleda. Since it says that will be born, so it's all about birth. And therefore, the child of Egyptian convert is assigned to the mother, because the mother is the one that gives birth to the child. And so, but the pasuk is directly saying, yes, it follows the mother. And so, even though, yes, regarding animals, the animal is separate from its mother, but in this case, regarding Egyptian converts, it says, follow the mother, follow she who gave birth to this one. Okay, so that would answer the question. Amar le Rav Dimi says, yes, you got it, you're right. Kar kapana hazite dereshach bene amudeh ki amar Rabbi Yochanan lehashmata. He says skull, meaning you have a great mind. I saw your head between the pillars of the study hall when Rabbi Yochanan taught this very halacha. In other words, I know you weren't actually there, you live in Bavel, but you were able, through your ingenuity, to come up with the answer that Rabbi Yochanan himself said. You jogged my memory, and that fits perfectly the answer correct. Okay, so now we're going to draw an inference from that. So that means it's only here regarding Egyptian converts, because it has the pasuk goes out of its way to say that will be born. That's why we follow matrilineal descent. But in other cases, we'll follow the father. Is that true? Goya me'oberet shenit gayera bena en sarich tebila. Amai en sarich tebila. Now remember, following the father is equal to the opinion that says that the fetus is a separate entity. Separate entity, that's why you follow the father. If you think it's part of the mother, then you follow the mother. That's how we understand these two opinions. So now, look what Rava says here regarding case of a woman who becomes pregnant and then converts while pregnant. She goes into the mikveh and converts while pregnant, and then she gives birth afterwards. What's the status of that child? And the answer is the child does not need tevilah. The child is therefore born Jewish. You can call them a convert, right? But they don't have to do their own tevilah. Why? Why doesn't it need tevilah? If you say that we follow the father. Follow the father means that the fetus is its own entity. It happens to be inside the mother, but it's really a separate life. It's its own thing. So the mother converted, but this fetus was conceived while not Jewish. So it's a non-Jewish fetus. It's its own entity, has its own ID card, and it never converted. Only the mother converted. You should have to convert the fetus. So this is a fascinating question. And so how are you going to answer that? Oh, maybe we're following Rabbi Yitzchak. I can answer it that way, because Rabbi Yitzchak says that according to the Doraita law, we can consider the fetus as if it could be a separate entity, and yet the dunking of the mother also works for the fetus, because the fetus also dunked, right? The fetus was also inside the water. Now, even though it didn't touch any of the water, because it's inside the mother's womb, and it's a be chatzitza, Rabbi Yitzchak says, don't worry about the chatzitza. Even if you have a chatzitza, if you have an interposition, and it covers most of the body, and you are particular about it. In other words, you don't want that to be there, right? Some kind of paint on your hand or something that you wish was not there, then that is an interposition. But even if it's on the majority of the body and you don't care about it, it's something that you like to be there, right? You want it there. Then it's not an interposition. Now go ask the fetus, would you like the womb to be around you? The fetus would say, yes, I love this womb around me. I would die without it. And so therefore we could say, even though it's covering most of it, it's not a chatzitza, because it wants to have the womb there, and therefore, even though the fetus is not touching the water, it's still considered it's still going to the mikveh itself. If you would say that, you can't say that. No, Rabbi Yitzchak only gave that leniency if it's a majority of the body, a person's body. Person's covered the majority with something that he likes to be there. Okay, fine. That is still good. They said they wouldn't meant to mikveh, but not fully enclosed. Even if they don't mind it being there, if they're fully enclosed in it, then it is an interposition. So we can't say that answer. Rather, shane obad tahainu debiter. But you know what? A fetus is different because that's it. That's its natural growth. That's its natural habitat. That's how it grows inside a womb. And so it couldn't live without it. And therefore, even though it's completely covered and none of it is actually touching the water, doesn't matter. We consider as if the womb, the fetus did itself dunk in the mikveh, and therefore did convert. So in other words, it's not because the mother converted and now it was born, and then that's why it's Jewish. No, it's because it is a separate entity, but as a separate entity, it went to the mikveh also, which would make a big difference. Can a kohen marry this child? Right? Do we consider it the baby itself? Do we consider it a convert? According to this, yes, it is a convert. It went to the mikveh itself, and therefore wouldn't be able to marry a kohen. Next, we get to the third version of the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. Ki ata ravina amar Rabbi Yochanan. Ba'umot halech achal hazachar itkayiru halech achal pagum shebishnehem. So here he's actually adding a different case altogether, that regarding other nations, if you have one nation marries another and you want to know what is this lineage, you go after the father. For example, one of the 7 nations in Israel, the law is that when Bnei Israel came in, they had to wipe them out. So what if one of those 7 nations marries someone from a faraway nation that you don't have to wipe them out? Who does it follow? It'll follow the father. But the next one is parallel to the 2 statements we said before, that if you have converts, 2 converts, or 1 convert and a Jewish, you should go after pagum shebishnehem, whichever one is more flawed in their lineage. And so in other words, not father and not mother as the previous versions, but the more pasul. Ba'umot halecha achar hazachar. Well, how does he know? What's the proof that regarding non-Jews, not converts, we follow patrilineal descent? Kedetanya minayin lechad bin hamot sheba ale kanadit velid ben. How do we know that a man from one of the foreign nations, not the 7, that comes and takes a Canaanite woman, one of the 7 nations, who you cannot allow to live, that you are allowed to buy them as a slave? That means you don't have to kill them, but you can buy them as slaves. In other words, we follow that it's foreign father. The pasuk says, even regarding those who are living amongst you, you can buy eved ve'ama. So what do you mean that they're foreign? Because their father came from a faraway place and came and impregnated a local Canaanite woman. We consider them foreigners, and therefore you can acquire them. and they don't fall under the genocide law. The Baraita continues, says, what about the other way around? If you have a Canaanite man that went, we always assume that the man travels and the women stay where they are. So if this Canaanite man travels to another country and he goes and has a child with a foreigner, we ask, can it be that we can acquire this person as an Eved? That's what Pasuk says, only if it's born in your land. In other words, if it's a foreign man who comes to Canaan, then you can leave them alive and acquire as a slave. But if it's a local man, one of the 7 nations, who goes and has a child with a foreign woman, then that goes by the father. And that child even will likely be born outside because the man travels. Even if that child should that child one day come and move to Israel, so that's noladim v'lo min hagarim. That would be garim be'artzechem. So only one who is born in the land, that person you can allow to live and acquire them as a slave, because their father must be from outside the land. But if their father is from in the land and had a child with a woman outside the land, and then came to just visit as an immigrant, then you cannot allow them to live. The genocide law applies to them because their father was from one of the 7 nations. So you see from here that identity for non-Jews follows the father. But the second statement was regarding converts, we go by the one that's more flawed. B'mai. What case is it talking about? If it's an Egyptian, let's say male, who for the first generations is prohibited, who marries a female Ammonite, well, she is perfectly legal immediately. So that wouldn't be a flaw that you would have to say, oh, the more flawed of them. Rather, Ammoni velo after all, Ammoni velo Ammonit, right? Because she is perfectly good. It only applies to males, not to females. Ela b'Ammoni shenasa mitzrit. Rather, think about the other way around. Ammoni, he's prohibited forever. Such a convert, he's prohibited to marry into the regular kahal, but he can marry someone else who is a convert or a similar situation, who marries a mitzrit, a woman who in the first generation, 2 generations also is prohibited. So there we have, they're both pagum in some way. So izachar have shadia batar amoni, inekeva have shadia batar misrit. In that case, it would actually make a difference. If they have a son, so then the son would go follow the Ammoni, because that's the more pagum. Ammoni males are prohibited forever, and so you would consider the child Ammoni and prohibited even his descendants forever. But if it's a girl, then we follow the mitzrit, because if you follow the Ammoni, she would be permitted immediately, and so that's less pagum. Instead, we follow the mitzrit so that she has to wait until the 3rd generation to be permitted, and that would be the more pagum in that case. All right, next Mishnah. Mamzerin. Neunetinim asurim. Visuran isur olam. Echad zecherim, echad nekebot. Mamzerim, Pasuk says, right, is prohibited forever. Natin are the people from Givon who tricked Yoshua and told them we're from a faraway place, even though they're actually local, and they had to be killed. Instead, Yoshua agreed to convert them. So they're converts under false pretenses. We're going to see that the prohibition for them to marry is actually a derabanan that was started by David HaMelech. We'll see the beginning of the story today. So they are forever, and it applies to males and females. Amel Shakish, mamzeret לאחד 10 דורות מותרת. יליף עשירי מעמוני ומואבי. מעלה נקבות מותרות, אף כאן נקבות מותרות. Very interesting opinion of Resh Lakish that says female mamzeret is permitted after 10 generations. And we learn that from the word asiri and asiri that appears both regarding Mamzer and regarding Ammoni and Moavi. And just like regarding Ammoni and Moavi, they were more lenient regarding the Kevot, so too here we're more lenient regarding the Kevot. I'll show you the Pesukim. Here it says, Lo Mamzer Bekal Hashem Gam, Dor Asiri Lo Yavo Lo Bekal Hashem. So you have Asiri. Ammoni and Moavi also says, Gam Dor Asiri Lo Yavo Lahem Bekal Hashem Ad Olam. Now, when it says 10 generations, you see Ammoni and Moavi, it doesn't mean literally 10 generations and afterwards will be permitted, because after all it says Ad Olam. So here, Asiri is just an expression. It said even 10 generations, and even more if you were able to keep a family tree that long, it would actually be forever. So without Resh Lakish, we make a regular Gezerah Shavah. That was the Mishnah that says Mamzer is forever. How do you know? It says 10 generations. Maybe it should be permitted. No, Asiri, we make a Kavachot, we make a Gezerah Shavah, just like this is forever, so too Mamzer is forever. So that's step one that everyone agrees with. Resh Lakish, however, is saying, hold on, now that you opened up the channel for a Gezerah Shavah, then I'm going to say, just like in Ammoni and Moavi, it only applies to males and not to females, I'm going to apply that leniency to Mamzer also, and say that a Mamzer, for males, we say Asiri Ad Olam, but for females, only 10 generations. Afterwards, the females are okay. That's a Shakish. Okay, we ask, hold on, if you're learning from Ammoni and Moavi to Mamzer, then you should say immediately the females are permitted, because Ammoni and Moavi is immediate. So Mamzeret also should be immediate. We say no. No, the Gezerah Shavah only works from 10 on. It was just a two-step process. First we say Asiri, that means forever. But then we say, forever is only for males. For females, we will derive a second step from the Gezerah Shavah and say it applies to males forever. Females will derive the permission, the leniency, but that leniency is only going to be after 10 generations. All right, that's Resh Lakish. Now we ask Resh Lakish's opinion. Our Mishnah said it's prohibited forever. How could you say that females are permitted after 10? The Mishnah says, it's not a problem. There's a machloket Tanaim about how Gezerot Shavot work. One opinion says, when you have a Gezerah Shavah, you can learn it again and again. That Resh Lakish is following that Tana. That first we learn that males are prohibited forever, and then we learn leniency. Women are more lenient. How much more lenient? After 10 generations is permitted. That's Resh Lakish is following that opinion. Whereas our Mishnah is following the other Tana that says when we open up a Gezerah Shavah, we learn from it and we leave it in its place. That's it. We only learn one thing and then we stop. We close it up. So what are we learning? Even 10 generations means Ad Olam, and that's it. That applies to men and women, and we do not learn anything further regarding a leniency for women. Shalu et Rabbi Eliezer, mamzer dat lachar asara dareh mahu. So now that we saw two opinions, the students came and asked Rabbi Eliezer, what do you think about female mamzerim after 10 generations? Amar lehem, mi yiten li dor shlishi v'tarenu. He says, I'll do one better. Bring me a third generation mamzer, and I will permit that. I will permit it. Sounds like it's saying male or female. Now this is surprising. What is he talking about? Alma kasavar mamzera la hayeh v'chen amar Rav Huna mamzera la hayeh. Oh, you know why he says I will permit it? Because it can't exist. There's a rule that he agrees with that says mamzerim do not survive. They will die some unnatural death somehow or another and will not survive into the next generation. So therefore, there is no such thing as a third generation mamzer. If you bring me one here, I'll say they're mutad, because obviously they're not a mamzer, because if they were mamzer, they would have already died. Okay, So now we ask, V'hanan tenan, is that true? Mamzerin asurin v'suran asur olam. It says here that they're prohibited forever, which means that it is possible for them to live. If mamzerim don't live, if they all have heart attacks or get hit by trucks, then there would be no mamzerim. We wouldn't have to say a law that they're prohibited forever. I got the explanation from Rav Yehuda. Diyadia haye, delayyadia la chaye, diyadia v'layyadia atilata derech chaye, tefela chaye. Those, he says, there's different categories. Those who are known to be mamzerim. Everyone knows this kid, the parents were for incest, and so that one will live. It's a paradox. Why will they live? They'll live because everyone knows about it and therefore will keep away and know not to marry that person. So they can live, no problem, and continue generations, and everybody will know this line, this family, mamzerim. If it's not known, if a woman a married woman committed adultery and had a child, and it's not known, no one knows about it, she's the only one that knows. Maybe even she is not sure. So it will not live. See, this is helpful because otherwise, if you don't have a rule like this, you always have to worry. Who knows? Anyone can be a sefek mamzer. Who can establish for sure that their parents and grandparents forever never had any problems? So the answer is you don't have to worry because we have an assumption here. If there was a mamzer and no one knows about it, they won't survive anyway. Okay, if it's known and not known, meaning it's a rumor, maybe a few people know about it, most people don't know about it, they're not actually sure, then it will last. They can have children up to 3 generations, but not anymore. And so this goes back and explains. So he says, show me someone who's a 3rd generation mamzer, and I'll say they're tahor, because either it's not known or somewhat known, in which case they won't survive, or it's known, in that case he's not talking about, because that would be known for sure. Okay, so therefore he's saying, I don't have to answer your question. It doesn't exactly line up, because here it sounds like, from here it sounds like none of them could exist. But in order to reconcile with our Mishnah, we say no. It must be someone exists if it's known, but otherwise not. But not if it's not known. One time there was some guy who lived in the neighborhood of Rabbi Ameh. Rabbi Ameh said, "Oh, this person I declare publicly as a mamzer. I know about what happened with his parents, mamzer." So the kid Bachev Azili was crying and crying because before that, nobody knew. Maybe he didn't even know. He was totally kosher. He could marry anybody. Now he's going to be ostracized. Terrible life. Rabbi Ameh cheers him up and says, no, I gave you life because no one knew you were a mamzer before. Therefore, you would have died young and not had children. Whereas now that everyone knows, you fit into the other category. So, yes, you'll have a hard life, but at least you'll live. Amar Rav Hana bar Ada, Netinim David gazar alein shneimar vayikra melech legiv'onim vayomer alehem hagiv'onim alehem vagiv'onim lo b'bnei Yisrael hema. So the Netinim who converted under false pretenses, so they are valid converts, but they can't marry. That's a gezerah d'Rabbanan that David HaMelech made. What is the story there? Let's look at those pesukim. In Shmuel Bet Kaf Aleph, then there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, and then after that, for 3 years, and after that, David prayed to Hashem. And so, what's going on? And Hashem said, because of Shaul and because of Bet Hadamim, Asher Amitet HaGivonim. So Shaul, it sounds like 2 things here. The Gemara will explain why it sounds like 2 things. It's because of something Shaul did, which is that he committed the bloodshed in which he killed Givonim. All right, we'll explain what story that is, that when Shaul killed Givonim. Anyway, Vayikra melech leGivonim vayomer alehem. So King David called the Givonim and told them. Now, it doesn't say what he told them. That we start a parentheses. By the way, Vagivonim lo b'nei Yisrael hema ki im miyeterem mori u'b'nei Yisrael nishbu lahem vayibakes Shaul lakotam v'kanotot b'nei Yisrael v'Yehuda. By the way, the Givonim are not actually from Israelite ancestry, but rather Ammonim, and they tricked with an oath. Okay, and then now it resumes. Now, what did David say? David, see, please tell me what I could do for you. How can we make it up to you? Because we have this famine because of this wrong that was done to you. So tell us how we could make it up so the famine will stop. Okay, now this we read as parentheses, but the Midrash is reading it as something he told them. He called them up and said, listen, you Givonim, we are not considering you part of Bnei Israel. We are not allowed to marry you. So that's the source. Good. Okay, my tama gazar alayhu. Now why? Why did David make a gezerah not to marry the nitinim, as the Gemara calls them? Because as we just said, there was a famine for 3 years. Now, for those 3 years, David said, oh, it must be because of the Givonim. So he went and asked them some questions, investigated. He says, oh look, maybe it's your fault because among you, even though you converted, it was fake conversion, maybe you're still idolaters. There's idolatry among you, and you're the reason why there's a famine. As the Torah says in Shema, that if you have idolatry, Hashem will stop the rain, and then there will be famine. So must be that there's some idolatry within you. You know what? We're not going to marry you, and we're going to examine. But they examined for a year. They didn't find any idolaters among the Givonim. So next year, he said, maybe something else we missed. Maybe there's some people transgressing adayot among you. Pasuk Yirmiyah says, you know why the rain is going to be withheld? Because you had a forehead like a zonah. You were obstinate and you were not even ashamed when you sinned, and you did all kinds of incestual sins. And that's why the rain is stopping. It's your fault. Let's check it out. But they examined. They didn't find that the Givonim were doing those sins either. So Shilishit, it's explaining why 3 years. Amar lahem shema poskei tzedakah v'rabim yesh bechem ve'enan notnim dichtiv nesiim v'ruach v'geshem ayin ish mitalel b'matat shaker. So he says maybe there are people who pledge money to tzedakah in public. They go and get up an aliyah. They say, I'm going to give $1,000 to the poor, and then they don't pay up. And that's as serious as the other two, because the pasuk in Mishleh says, just like vapor and wind without rain, meaning why does rain not come? Someone who boasts a false gift. That's another reason why rain wouldn't come. And this is a nice derasha. I'll encourage everyone to pay their synagogue bills. So he said, maybe that's why the rain's not coming in. It's your fault. But they investigated. David investigated. He found the Givonim were not responsible for that either. So he said, "Oh, I guess I was blaming the Givonim the whole time for the rain not coming. I guess it's not their fault." Amad ena davar talui elabi. You know, must be something that I did or didn't do. I have to fix this myself. Miyad v'vakesh David p'nei Hashem. So that's why he prayed. After blaming someone else, he realized he needs to pray and introspect. Maihi amar shakish shal ba'urim v'tumim. Now, how did David pray to Hashem? It means he asked the urim v'tumim. That was his method for divination. Mai mashma. How do you know that means that? Amar Rabbi Elazar atya pene pene. Ketiv hachav habekesh David et pene Hashem. Uchtiv atam shalom b'mishpat ha'urim lifnei Hashem. So it says when he went to the presence of God, the face of God. It also says that in the description of the urim v'tumim that the kohanim would inquire Peneh Hashem. So that's how you know that he used Urim v'Tumim. Okay, good. Ve'omer Hashem, and what does Hashem answer? El Shaul ve'el bet hadamim al asher emita givonim. So notice it sounds like it's two things. God said you're guilty because of Shaul and because of the bloodshed that was done by the Givonim. So what does that mean? El Shaul shelo nispad kalacha. On the one hand, you did not eulogize Shaul properly. That's one reason you're being punished. Vel bet hadamim asher al asher emita givonim. And two is because Shaul put to death the Givonim. So it's kind of two opposites. The other ones, you didn't eulogize him properly, but also he did terrible things that were not recompensed. Okay, V'chi echad masin b'shul shemit Givonim. Did Shaul, he didn't directly kill Givonim, ela mitoch sheharag nov ir kohanim shayu maspikin lahen mayim u'mazon ma'aleh alav hakatub ki'ilu haragan. When Shaul was running after David and they got to Nov, the city of Kohanim, and Nov unknowingly helped out David. They knew he was David, but they thought he was on a royal mission. And they helped out David. And then Shaul got angry. And then Doeg Hadomi, who was in the previous part of this, in the previous Agadah, he went and killed all of the Kohanim. Now, who was giving food and water to the Kohanim? It was the Givonim. That was their job. Yoshua said, because you tricked us, you're going to be Shuavei Mayim, you're going to have to bring us food, wood, and wood choppers and water drawers. So now that their customer base is gone because the Shaul caused the whole city of Kohanim to die, and Givonim were providing, and then the Kohanim would pay the Givonim for their services, and now they have no one to service, and now they don't have the Givonim don't have a means of living. It's as if Shaul killed them. So it's quite indirect, but you learn another important lesson here, that taking away a person's livelihood, even if you're just taking away their customers for some other reason, is tantamount to killing them. Okay. Now that we know that what David was responsible for, we wonder, on the one hand, David is being punished for not eulogizing Shaul, and also because he has to get retribution upon Shaul for what he did bad. That sounds like opposite things. Is that possible? Yes, it is. Damar Shakish, Mai dichti bakeshuat Adonai kol anvei aretz. Asher mishpato pa'alu, ba'asher mishpato sham pa'alo. So what Pasuk in Sefania says, seek at Hashem, humble of earth, those have executed his justice. So you see, back to back, it talks about those who have talks about justice, and also pa'alu, deeds that they did. So both good deeds and justice are put together, because whenever we're going to mete out justice, you should also mention the good deeds. Always mention the bad with the good. Whenever you're criticizing someone, also mention the good things that they do. And so to even Shaul, although he did some terrible thing here and killed Novi Kohanim, and therefore indirectly killed the Givonim, and this was a bad thing, nevertheless, he's not all bad. Also, it's appropriate to mention his good deeds, and David did not eulogize him properly, and we'll see the continuation of this fantastic Agadah on the next daf. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'amen.